Welcome back to the garage. In this video, we're going to be continuing work on project GX470. If you're curious how we got to where we are, be sure to check the link in the description below for the entire playlist from the beginning to today. In this video, we're going to be taking on replacing the timing belt. However, that's not all we're going to be doing. In fact, we're going to be doing a lot more because this truck has 240,000 miles and it needs every service in the book. That means doing a valve clearance adjustment, potentially replacing the camshaft oil seals, doing valve cover gaskets, replacing the coolant, replacing the water pump, replacing other seals. I mean, it's just everything you could possibly do, we're going to be doing in this video. So of course this requires a lot of parts to be replaced while we're in there, so be sure to check the link in the description below for an entire parts list that you can just go down, find the links to all the parts you need, the part numbers, and order them so you can do them on your GX470. Now to get the party started, we need to remove all of the covers in the engine bay, this radiator support, that panel over there covering the air filter, and this engine cover. And then we'll start draining the coolant. Left for me. say that's a decent amount of oil on that. I've set the engine to top dead center, meaning the harmonic balancer alignment marker is on the 0 on this front cover, and then both camshaft sprockets have a mark aligned with this vertical marker. Having it set like that will allow me to check the valve clearance on about half the valves, and then I can rotate the crank 360 degrees and get the other half of the valves. The general rule of thumb when checking valve clearance is you want to check the clearance on the camshaft lobes that are pointing away from the shim. So this rounded part is a safe spot to start measuring valve clearance. You don't want to attempt, or you won't be able to measure valve clearance on any valve that's currently being depressed by the tip of the lobe. Alright, so that's all the valve clearances checked, and out of 32 valves, 7 were out of spec, which isn't too bad for a vehicle that likely has never had this job performed and has 240,000 miles. Pretty dang good. The other positive is most of the valves that are out of spec are actually too large of a gap instead of too small, which is definitely the side of things you want to be on if something is out of spec. Surprisingly, we had a lot of exhaust valves with too large of a gap. We had one intake valve with too large of a gap, and then we had one exhaust valve with too small of a gap, which is actually what I was expecting to find more of. There's only one valve with that problem, so that is very positive news. Next, I'm going to pull off the timing belt, pull off the water pump, and then start pulling out the cams, because the only way we're going to know what new shims we need to put in to close up or widen those valve clearance gaps is to pull the shims out and measure their thickness so we can order new ones in the correct size. So kind of a strange deal here. You're supposed to set the crankshaft pulley so that it aligns with the marking on the oil pump right there. And when you have that set, then it'll align with the marks on the camshaft sprockets and that backing plate. Kind of see how that's the case there on both sides. However, service manual says, now back the crankshaft in a counterclockwise rotation about 50 degrees, which means that alignment key will be facing directly upward. Not really sure why they want you to do that, but it has something to do, I'm sure, with the variable valve timing system. But anyway, I'll do that. Okay, now that alignment key is pointing directly upward, that's about 50 degrees in Toyota's book anyway. That's what the diagram they show you shows the crankshaft being at. And with that known, I'm going to put markers on the backing plate so I can align the camshaft sprockets with the adequate spot. There's no marker that I can see there by default, so I'm just going to put a little dot there so I know where it should go back to. So right here, I'm just breaking loose the cam sprocket from the VVT solenoid here. Make sure you only loosen the Allen key head bolts. Do not loosen these 5-pointed star security type bolts. Not that you'd have a tool to even do that to begin with, but do not loosen those. Now begins the fun of prepping to remove the camshafts from the cylinder head, and this is where it gets a bit complex. And you'll notice we're on the driver's side, or the left side cylinder head, and we need to first get a bolt in place to hold a split cam gear in place. So there's a spring-loaded split cam gear that you need to secure so it doesn't go out of alignment when you do pull out the camshaft. And how you go about doing that is you just rotate the camshaft till you see a spot where you can insert a bolt. And we're coming up on it right there. It's the exhaust side that has a split gear. So if you're to look in there, there's actually 2 sets of gears. And there's a hole right here where you can put a screw. Now the screw you need to get, you actually need to get 2 of them, are M6 by 1.0 pitch. And it needs to be between 16 and 20 millimeters long. This is about 20 millimeters long. And you just need to put it in there and thread it into place. Hold the 4 gears together. And there, now that bolt's in place. Now the next part of this is to align the gears at their marker points. And this is a bit difficult, but it's right there. It's gonna be darn near impossible to show on the camera, but the Toyota factory actually handily put a yellow paint mark where it is, and you can see how they're aligned. But right here in the middle, there are dots imprinted in the gears themselves that tell you that's where it lines up at. So you just want to keep that as a reference mark when you go to reinstall these. It doesn't really matter when taking it apart, but it does matter when you go to put it back together. Those gears have to be perfectly set the same way they are right now, or else things will be very much out of time. So we've done the stuff we need to do. Now we need to start removing the cam cap bolts. There's quite a few of them, over 20 of them in fact. When undoing these, they need to be done in a certain order, as well as only partially loosened at a time, so that you don't risk cracking the camshaft by forcing it to flex more than it's capable of doing. That's pretty standard procedure when removing camshafts from an engine. You never want to undo one bolt all at once and cause focused stress in one location. And here is the bucket for the valve, and here is the shim inside of that bucket or under that bucket. This is what we need to measure to see what the new shim size should be. So here I have a micrometer. And we want to measure the middle of that shim. So it looks like it measures at 2.228 millimeters. So now that we have the measured clearance plus the measured shim, Toyota has given us a handy equation to determine the thickness of the new shim. So the equation is different based on whether you're measuring the exhaust or intake shim. This is an exhaust shim, so we'll use this equation right here. So the thickness of the removed shim is 2.228 millimeters. Measured valve clearance was 0.381 millimeters. So this would be N equals 2.228 plus measured valve clearance, which is 0.381 minus 0.30. So that comes out to be 2.309. Alright, so what does that really mean? Well, Toyota supplies this chart to find the correct shim. They have like 41 or 42 different shim sizes, so you have to use your measured clearance and the shim size, and then you find where they intersect here to find your actual shim number. So I figured out that this chart is less useful than just calculating it out and finding out the closest shim Toyota offers to the resulting shim thickness value. And I found, after searching through Toyota's parts diagram, that the closest shim they have to 2.309 is 2.320. So Toyota only sells shims in increments of 200ths. So unfortunately, they don't have a 2.310, which would be basically a perfect fit. But a new shim of 2.320 would get me down to a measured valve clearance of 0.289 millimeters, which is well within the bounds of the exhaust range, which is 0.25 to 0.35 millimeters. So that's basically how you do it. It's a little tedious, but definitely doable. So that's one new shim documented that I need to order. 6 more to go. Alright, so I've gone through and measured the rest of the 7 shims to determine what the new shim size is needed for each, and I came up with this little equation here to figure it out. So first you take the measured shim size, so for example 2.227, then you subtract that from the 2 shim options that surround the shim size we got from Toyota's calculation right here. Since Toyota only makes shims in increments of 200ths, you always have 2 shim sizes that surround the calculated perfect shim thickness. So based on that, you subtract the available shim thickness from the measured shim thickness, and that gives you the difference between the two. If the original valve clearance was too large of a gap, you'll end up with a negative number here, where if your measured valve clearance was too small of a gap, you'll end up with a positive number here. And whatever you end up there with, you add the valve clearance measurement to it. So in this case, that valve was 0.381 millimeters, and that gives you the resulting calculated clearance amount. So for this example, this is an exhaust valve, and the range on an exhaust valve is 0.25 to 0.35. You're always wanting to hit as close to the middle as possible. So this particular shim, if I were to order the 2.3 millimeters, would get me to 0.308 calculated clearance. That's almost perfect. That's right in the middle there of that range. Now the other possible shim is 2.32, which after running through the calculations gives you a resulting valve clearance of 0.288. While that's okay, it is on the tighter side than on the looser side, and I'd always shoot for going on the looser side if you can, because typically valve clearances close up over time. So that's the shim I'm going to order for that particular valve. I went through and ran that calculation for the rest of the remaining 6 valves, and I got the exact shim size I need. While we're waiting on the new shims to get here and various other parts, let's go ahead and disassemble the camshaft to replace the oil seal. Now if we look closely at this, you can clearly see that the oil seal is internal of the camshaft. There isn't any way to replace this without removing the camshaft, and that's because this variable valve timing actuator right here is bolted to the camshaft, and when you unbolt that, it removes this front section from this gear back. And there's a cam bearing journal right there that obviously is part of this assembly that you simply could not remove without taking the camshaft out of the cylinder head. But if we also look closely where this seal rides against on the camshaft itself, you can see it's worn a groove. And that's no good, because that will likely lead to an eventual leak with a new seal. So we're going to have to try and move the seal as far forward as possible while still sealing along the outer circumference of the seal so that the seal lip can ride in a new section of the camshaft. Normally in this situation, I'd try to put a speedy sleeve or a ready sleeve over the top of that, but they don't make one in the right depth. They make one in the right diameter, but it's too wide to fit on this fairly narrow spot we've got here. So we're just going to have to make do with the surface we have and just trying a different depth to press the seal in with. Now before you remove the gear, make sure you understand which side it should go on. I don't know that they've probably made this foolproof, but always be sure to recognize the sides so you can put it back correctly. Now this is being a little stubborn coming off, so gotta get a little creative. Hopefully you have a 2-jaw puller in your arsenal, get you unstuck from situations like this. Alright, now we can finally take the seal off. It's impressive this isn't in worse condition for 240,000 miles. It just got some dirt in it, and it's getting a little stiff. It's really not that bad though. So before I stick the new seal on there, I want to try and clean this up as best I can. You can definitely see that shiny ridge right there. Catches the fingernail a little bit. It's definitely there. There, that looks much better. A bit better surface for the seal to ride on. And here is our new seal. Oh no! The spring and everything is deformed. That's not going to work at all. Look at that. Well, we have another one here. Hopefully this one's not deformed. This one looks circular. That's good. Oh, that's frustrating. I have to go get another one of these. Anyway, here's the new seal. Bit more supple feeling for sure. So first, put a little bit of oil, engine oil, on the lip of the seal. A little bit here. Oh, there's. And make sure you're putting it on with the seal face pointing that direction. And then you just slide it all the way on to the stop. And that's that. Now it's just reassembly. .58 foot-pounds. Then you need to install a new sealing plug washer. It is a rubber piece, really is one-time use. .11 foot-pounds. 66 inch-pounds. Alright, so that is one side done. Just repeat the exact same thing on the other camshaft. So I decided to go back to the original Toyota spark plug tube seals because the Felpro ones I just didn't feel like fit very well once I put them in there. Now it's important to install these the right direction. Something, just an easy rule of thumb, is you can see the part number and brand name here on this inner lip. This should be facing the outside of the valve cover, so you should insert it like that. And then there's a kind of a curved lip right here. This should be facing the inside. Now to install these, I'm going to take one of the old original Toyota seals that I removed and slide it over the top like this. And then that'll allow me to tap it into place without harming the inner portion of the new seal. There we we go, that's inserted nicely. Just tap it in until it can't go any further. Pretty simple. Then you just bend these tabs back down and move on to the next one. Since we're here, it makes sense to replace the PCV valve and PCV valve hose. While this one still appears to be functioning, you can see it's not looking very pretty, and it's cheap enough insurance to just replace it. Like new. Good news, I finally got the new shims for adjusting the valves. It took about 2.5 weeks to get all of these, which just goes to show how frequently these engines actually get valve adjustments. It's a nice way of saying they're not in stock, nobody is ever doing this. I probably sent a few warehouses into a flurry searching for these things just because no one ever asks for them. So again, if you're going to do this, do expect the vehicle to be down for probably about 2 weeks while you wait for these to get in. We have 4 different sizes here, and these are all identified by the number that's printed on them. It's kind of how Toyota identifies them. They don't really go by the exact size. They just say it's a Mark 38 or a Mark 32, and that basically tells you the tenths and hundredths values in millimeters. Now, before we go and install these new shims, we definitely want to measure the new ones and make sure they are the size that they say they are. Sometimes manufacturers make mistakes, and trust me, they ain't gonna feel bad about it. They'll give you a refund for the one shim, but they won't give you a refund for the engine that it might destroy. So make sure you measure those, because you are the last line of quality assurance. Once it's done, let's get them installed in the engine. Now, an important thing to remember when installing the camshaft is to make sure your marker points on these gears are aligned, and you'll just kind of have to rotate them around as you're installing the last camshaft to make sure they do line up. So you can see when you rotate that, those two markers line up, so we know those two cams are in time with one another. Now, another interesting note here is that the cam seal does not get installed in its slot quite yet. You want to keep it pushed far back towards the sprocket side, and this is because the service manual actually says after we've put the cam bearing caps on, then you push the seal into its groove. Now when installing the cam bearing caps, you want to make sure you put them back in the exact same spot that they came out of, because they are worn specifically to the journals that they go to. Now also you want to put oil on the threads of all the bolts that are inside of the cylinder head, but you do not want to put oil on the bolts that go to the cam bearing cap here on the front of the engine. You also want to put some oil on the top of the bolt head so that they kind of do more of a sliding action as they tighten. Again, that's only on the bolts that are inside of the cylinder head. The ones that are external of it do not need oil on the heads of them at all. Now it's time to install the front bearing cap. You see I put assembly lube here in the cam journals, and then I've got FIPG here along the edges to seal against the cylinder head. Okay, once that's resting in place, now we're supposed to push the cam seal into place. Alright, with the seal now pressed into place, now it's time to install the bolts. You'll notice the 4 of the bolts, these forwardmost ones, have new sealing washers on them. You do need to replace those. Both of them. 66 inch-pounds. Now you want to make sure you take out your service bolt from the cam gear. And there, Now the cams are installed. £72 inch. 53 inch-pounds. The 5 bolts are 16 foot-pounds. The nut down in the corner here is 13 foot-pounds. The stud bolts are 13 foot-pounds. Alright, so now we're at the stage where we can put in the new timing belt. And to do that, we have to make sure the crankshaft and the cam sprockets are in the right position. So the first step in doing this is making sure your cam sprockets are aligned with the timing cover backing plate. And you can see right here, this red mark is where there's an indentation on this right side cam sprocket. It's lined up with this vertical line there on the timing cover. Same thing on the other side. We've got an indentation there, red marker, lined up with this vertical line. So that means our cams are aligned properly. Now we have to make sure the crankshaft is in top dead center, at least wherever they've decided to put the markers. And you can actually see that. There's a small little indentation right there in the crankshaft sprocket. That needs to be aligned with this little dot there on the oil pump cover. So we just need to turn that just a slight bit. Now we can install our OEM Toyota timing belt. OEM Toyota makes it just easier on yourself. You got markers for your right cam pulley, your left cam pulley, right there, and also crankshaft marker. Just a reminder, when installing the tensioner pulley, you got to make sure this washer is on the back side of it. I forgot, you do want to put a little bit of thread lock on this bolt. $25 foot-pounds. All right, so that is the timing belt installed. All of the markers are lined up. Now we need to rotate the engine basically 2 revolutions and ensure that our timing markers on all of the pulleys line up once again. That tells us that our belt is in fact in correct timing with all the pulleys, and the engine will run just fine. All right, so that is 2 full revolutions. All of the timing markers are lining up, so this belt is installed correctly, and now we're ready to reassemble. Next, I'm going to install new spark plugs in the cylinder heads. 181 foot-pounds. Now the next part is to install the cooling fan bracket. And here's the old one, and just listen to the bearing on this. So this has every bit of 241,000 miles on it. I decided that this is about on its way out, so I've ordered a brand new ASIN one. ASIN is the OEM Toyota supplier, so smooth and quiet, brand new, not dirty, just a proper time to install this part. .24 foot-pounds. .12 foot-pounds. .11 foot-pounds. .12 foot-pounds. .29 foot-pounds. Another thing that I've decided to replace while I'm in here is the alternator. The one that was in the car was just covered in oil and grease, and I really don't trust it to last another 100,000 miles. Another reason is these are kind of difficult to access. Even with all the things I've removed, it's a bit hard to get to. It's a bit hard to like jigsaw out of the engine bay and back into it. So I figured this is the best time to replace the alternator. I got a remanufactured one directly from Toyota, so it is a Denso, just like OEM. So this should be it. This is about as good as you can get. You might be able to get them new still, but they're significantly more expensive. This was around $200. But believe me, $200 is worth it compared to the inconvenience and frustration when your car just dies because it's no longer getting charged. So as you can see, that is a very nice looking alternator. Spins smoothly. Should be good to go for a very long time to come. .29 foot-pounds. .11 foot-pounds. 13 foot-pounds. When installing the new thermostat, you want to make sure the jiggle valve is as pointed directly upward or as perpendicular as possible. "14 foot-pounds. Now another part that I didn't know I had to replace until I got in here is the cam position sensor that goes here on the left bank. You can see that the wires, the insulation has all come off, and if it hasn't already been shorting, it will certainly start shorting very soon. Now, unfortunately, I think the sensor itself is okay, and it's just this harness that's got brittle over time because it's been contaminated with oil and heat. It just needs replaced, but they don't really sell the harness. At least I couldn't find one. You can see it has this, it's a 3-wire harness, and then it has this 4th grounding wire there. So it's kind of more complex than just simply a pigtail. Really, your only option here is just to buy a completely new sensor. Couldn't get a Toyota one in time. They didn't have any in stock within a 500-mile radius at any dealer, so I did have to get one from Napa. It looks like it's high quality, and it should be just fine. It really is just the wiring that goes wrong on these things. They make 2 different styles. At least UZ engines have 2 different styles. There's a 2-wire one and a 3-wire one. Make sure you check yours and order the right one. Now, I did have to get new fan nuts because the old ones were on there so tight that while I was trying to take them off, it rounded them off. I had to get a chisel out to get them off. So you don't have to get these from Toyota, but they're not very expensive and they look nice. Alright, so that is the coolant system topped up as well as I can get it without turning the engine on. So the next step is to turn it on and warm it up and let the system self-bleed. This is kind of a moment of truth because it's the first time turning it on after putting everything back together. Fingers crossed. Okay, when I started this back up, everything's working well except for the power steering fluid. It's really dark. It was dark before, but for whatever reason now the power steering pump is whining like crazy. And I'm wondering if somehow air got trapped in the system while I was working on it. Now that I'm running it, that air can't clear because the fluid is maybe just too old and terrible. So I'm just gonna go ahead and change it while we're here. I was planning on doing this later, but it seems to be important to do now. You can see how dark that fluid is. It's black. No good. Okay, so what we're going to do now is pull off the return hose, which is this top one here, and we'll plug the opening and put this into a container so that we can fill the reservoir up with fresh fluid and just let the car run, turn the steering lock to lock, and just start flushing new fluid throughout. Okay, this is kind of jankety, but I took an air hose fitting and threaded it onto a piece of clear tubing, and I'm just going to stick it into the return hose here. And since this isn't a high pressure return, I think we'll be okay. Famous last words. But yeah, we'll let this drain into this jug, and then we'll put the new fluid in here. Now this just needs some basic automatic transmission fluid. This is GX470 equivalent. We'll go ahead and top up the reservoir with fresh fluid. Now we'll just turn it on and let it cycle. Okay, turn it off. You can see that we've now got red fluid in there, or coming out. Now we just need to turn it lock to lock to make sure the entire steering rack has fresh fluid. Yep. Maybe a little faster. Okay, stop. Yep, off. Oh, we're gonna go through so much fluid. At the end, before I told you to turn it off, it started getting really dark, so whatever direction you were going was a direction we hadn't gone before. So we'll just keep doing that. Okay. Yeah. Stop. Off. And as you can see, now we've completely flushed the system. We have red fluid coming out, and now the pump isn't howling anymore. It's something I had to do anyways. I guess it just wanted it done now. It's one of those jobs that never gets done on vehicles, and it's very important if you want to keep your power steering pump and steering rack in good shape. Alright, so we've got it all the way up to operating temperature. Now I'm just going to let it come cool all the way down and let the radiator draw in all of the coolant that's sitting here. And after that's done, it should be completely bled. Alright, so the engine has completely cooled down and the cooling system has pulled in as much coolant as it can hold. We have just a little bit left sitting here in this funnel, which is a good sign. Now I just need to remove this and close up the radiator. And now the finishing touch, what is arguably one of the most important steps when doing a timing belt change, is the service decal saying when it was done and at what mileage it was done. Don't know why this doesn't often make it onto engines after a timing belt is done. Either it's the mechanic didn't use an OEM timing belt, so he didn't get the sticker, or they're just lazy and don't put it on there. Regardless, this is your only guaranteed piece of service history when doing this important job. Now it is stamped on the engine itself. There's no question when the timing belt was last changed. And with that, I think that's a good stopping point for this video. We covered all of the things that a 200,000 mile plus GX470 needs, not just could need, it is a need. They all need to be inspected to this degree if you want them to keep running well for a long time to come. Now we went through a lot of parts. Again, if you need to do this job, check the link in the description below for the entire parts list for the GX470 like the one we're doing behind me. In the next video, we will take on changing the transmission fluid on one of these. It is going to be a complete flush and refill, so stay tuned. As always, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you all again next time.